The day after Skilling resigned, Sharon Watkins sent a letter to Ken Lay.
We will begin with Ms. Watkins.
I am Sharon Watkins.
Would you identify your counsel for the committee?
Yes, my counsel is Mr. Philip Hilder.
When you hear the story for the first time, it's unbelievable. What Sharon was telling me was more than accounting irregularities as such. I mean, it was a massive fraud of enormous proportions.
In mid to late June of 2001, upon the resignation of Cliff Baxter, I went to work directly for Mr. Fastow.
It has evolved to the corporate crime of the century.
I was highly alarmed by the information I was receiving.
What Sharon Watkins discovered began the unraveling of Fastow's complex partnerships.
Andy put me in charge of this asset listing, and there were about a dozen assets that had been hedged with one of Andy's entities, the Raptors. And so I was working with a spreadsheet, and the math just didn't add up. It didn't make sense to me. I mean, accounting doesn't get that creative. I couldn't believe that Arthur Andersen had signed off on it. I couldn't believe that so many people were going along.
Behind Fastow's partnerships were enormous guarantees of Enron stock. Fastow had gambled Enron's future on the hope that its stock would never fall.
My first reaction was that I should warn Ken Lay. The day after Skilling left, I sent this one-page anonymous letter. But within a week, I was meeting with Ken Lay. I'd identified myself in the hopes of really making my point that Enron needed to address this situation. I mean, companies rarely get away with cooking the books, but when they do survive, it's when they come clean, not when they're exposed from the outside.
Ms. Watkins, I went
Ms. Watkins did not talk to me, Senator.
Well, Ms. Watkins said Clifford Baxter told her that he met with you repeatedly to express his concern.
Cliff and Andy they didn't like each other. They had a very strained personal relationship, and Cliff's issue had nothing to do with the appropriateness or inappropriateness of the transaction.
I'd mentioned Cliff Baxter in these memos. And I remember I made the comment to him, well, you're one of the good guys. You were one of the people fighting against this, and it'd be all right. And he said, oh, I don't think it's going to be all right for any of us involved in this.
When I started working on the book with Sharon, I was interested in writing about a whistleblower. People don't really appreciate what she did and the bravery that it took in that company.
Andy Fastow would not have put his hands in the Enron candy jar without an explicit or implicit approval to do so by Mr. Skilling.
I can't for the life of me see what basis she would have for suggesting that I would know some of that. I mean, how would she know that? And I don't see that it's at all inconsistent that there would be some things I don't know if some people purposely kept me from knowing some things.
I felt like I was one lone voice within Enron saying, look, we've committed horrible fraud. And of course, all hell broke loose. Within 6 short weeks, Enron was spinning out of control.
It is my belief that Enron's failure was due to a classic run on the bank.
Don't look now, but there's something funny going on over there at the bank, George. I've never really seen one, but that's got all the earmarks of being a run.
On December 2nd, 2001, less than 4 months after Skilling's resignation, Enron declared bankruptcy.
I remember it was just a strange, kind of a surreal day. We learned around 9:30 about the bankruptcy and that we were all being let go. We all felt like we were on the Titanic and the last lifeboats had long gone and we were just now on the sinking ship. We had 30 minutes to leave the building, and at that point, it was no longer like being on the Titanic. It was kind of like being on the Lusitania. The torpedo had hit, and there's 20 minutes to get out.
There was a lot of disbelief. Very few of the rank and file people ever dreamed that Enron would actually go bankrupt. And then all of a sudden it was like a ghost town. I can remember going into the old building on certain floors late in the afternoon or evening, and it was scary. There'd be like papers blowing around and nobody there, and it was very eerie.
Mr. Skilling, your opening statement was extremely compassionate to the employees, and I want to show you a tape, and I believe we have it ready to go. Listen to this.
Should we invest all of our 401k in Enron stock? Absolutely. Don't you guys agree?
Why is it that you had begun unloading your stock pretty heavily before that date, and yet led the employees to think they should keep buying stock?
Mr. Senator, I have been a major shareholder in Enron Corporation, and you can take the videotape to mean what you want it to mean. I was a supporter of Enron Corporation.
You know what happened to those people. They lost everything.
I feel terrible about what happened to the employees.
Well, at one time, things were really rosy for us, and we all had some really nice-looking 401ks and pensions, but it peaked, and then it just started going down and went lower and lower and lower. The peak, I had about $348,000, and I sold it all for $1,200 was what I got for it when it was done.
While Enron's stock was plummeting, the retirement accounts of Enron's rank-and-file workers were frozen.
We were frozen out of our accounts. It was right about $32, I believe. And over that time, from when it was frozen to when it opened up, I think it went down to $9. And we could not access it. And what came out later that was so bad was the fact that Ken Lay and Skilling and all the top people were moving their money then. But we couldn't.
The insiders had sold off $1 billion of their stock. Compare that to the lineman who worked for a state-owned utility company for most of his life, put away money each month, and what's he have to show at the end of the day for his years of hard and decent labor? He gets a big goose egg. And Pi is out in Hawaii somewhere with $350 million in the bank. That's wrong.
There's still, to this city, a layer of anger and upset. I am still doing counseling 3 years later with some families. With some of those who are most reflective, it's gone to a deeper layer. And they are looking at the corporate culture itself in this country. You know, you can gain the whole world and all the trinkets and all the trophies of the world, the corner office and all the perks. And you really can lose your soul in the midst of this.
On January 25, 2002, 7 weeks after the Enron bankruptcy, Cliff Baxter committed suicide.
With the media hounding him because he was mentioned in my memos, and the fact that he had been sued civilly because he'd cashed in for about $30 million worth of stock, I guess it all came crashing down on it. I think Cliff's suicide note tells it all. You know, where there was once great pride, now there is none.
It's very hard for me to talk about Cliff. We were very close for many years. And he was a wonderful, wonderful man. But a lot of who Cliff was tied up in how he had succeeded at Enron. It is hard to look at your life's work and say, it's failed. But you have to take a long, cold look at yourself and say, who was I? Who did I become? And realize that you may have seen your shadow.
Andy Fastow pled guilty to conspiracy to commit wire fraud. He agreed to forfeit $23 million in assets. His sentence was reduced to 10 years in exchange for testifying against other Enron executives.
Why Enron? Why not WorldCom or Tyco or Global Crossings? Ultimately, in Enron, the fatal flaw was the sense that brains and wiliness could outthink the way that the system eventually will work.
In 2004, Jeff Skilling was indicted for insider trading and conspiracy to defraud investors. Pleading innocent, he paid his attorneys a retainer of $23 million to defend him.
Enron should not be viewed as an aberration, something that can't happen anywhere else, because it's all about the rationalization that you're not doing anything wrong. We've involved Arthur Andersen, we've involved the lawyers, the bankers know what we're doing. There's a sense, the diffusion of responsibility. Everyone was on the bandwagon, and it can happen again.
Enron's accounting firm, Arthur Andersen, was convicted of obstructing justice. With its reputation for honesty destroyed, America's oldest accounting firm fell along with Enron, and 29,000 people lost their jobs. Enron shareholders are suing Enron and its banks for $20 billion. Ken Lay was also indicted for conspiracy to commit fraud. His attorney maintains that no one has been hurt more by the Enron bankruptcy than Ken Lay.
Well, they didn't show up this morning. With today's arrest of Ken Lay, the top echelon at Enron has now been called to account for their crimes. Mr. Lay, you have anything to say, sir? A little later today, I'll help.
Looking at Enron is like looking at the flip side of so much possibility, because like most things that end terribly, it didn't start out that way. It started with a lot of people who thought they were changing the world, and over time they became victims of their own hubris, victims of their own greed, and so it's like taking so much promise and possibility and looking at it in a mirror and seeing the flip side reflected back at you.
I think the larger lesson was what Enron asked of its employees, which was ask why. And, you know, I didn't ask myself why enough. I didn't ask managers why enough. I didn't ask my colleagues why enough.
Someone to pull you out of that ditch, you're out of luck. You're out of luck.